There are so many people who work behind the scenes in sports and sports broadcasting that it would be impossible to know about each one of them, even if you work with them on a frequent basis. My guest on this podcast is one of the people I've worked with occasionally through the years, but I only discovered a couple of years ago how much of a pioneer she is in sports. Amy Smolens joins me to talk about her childhood basketball success, only to be turned away by the New York Nets basketball team, how she was one of the first women to work on Yankees baseball broadcasts, and all of the adventures she's had in her impressive sports TV career. This episode has visuals, so if you're listening, please be sure to subscribe to the Sports and Making YouTube channel at Sports Making to see some of what we discuss. Amy Smolens joins me on this podcast from one of her many work environments. She's currently at UC Berkeley Haas Pavilion, where she just worked a volleyball match. We're going to talk about what an amazing career she's had in broadcast sports that spans the globe. Amy is a pioneer in sports broadcasting dating back to the 1970s, and we're going to go into all the things that she's done, including some interesting stories that I just discovered after working with her over a number of years just last year, which is really significant for women in sports. So Amy, thank you for joining me on the Sports in the Making podcast.
Thanks for having me, Don.
I've talked to a lot of people who have made some impact in sports, and one of the things that I really like is finding out more about their history. Talk to me about how you got into sports broadcasting.
Well, I'd always been an athlete. I'd played basketball throughout high school and a little bit in college, and played soccer, and I graduated from Duke in 3 years. So I asked my parents, I had a degree in Spanish. I asked my parents, hey, look, since I graduated early, can I have a year of grace and try to find a job in sports? And they said, okay, that sounds fair. So I sent resumes with that had very little experience, because I'd been playing ball, studying, working in dining halls, waiting tables, things like that. So I sent these resumes out to teams, to leagues, to TV stations, and all over the place, anywhere in sports, New York and all over the country. So I got an offer from the Durham Bulls to work in PR. So that was I have something, if that's what I ended up doing. But then Don Carney at WPIX Channel 11 called me to set up an interview to work on Yankee baseball, which for a New Yorker is like the most incredible, a most incredible opportunity you could ever think of. And at the time, most teams did not televise their home games, because they kind of felt like, well, that would cut into the gate and that would ruin the gate. The Yankees were smart, and they realized that it would actually create more interest, so they televised all their games. So this was an opportunity to work 162 games. So I went to a couple of interviews. One interview, he asked me, can you keep score of a baseball game? And I said, well, I can't go to a baseball game and not keep score. I have to keep score. So that was a point. And then another one, he said, well, this is live TV. You can't make mistakes. It's live. It's on the fly. And I said, oh, I've waited tables. I can juggle waiting 10 tables at once. I'll be fine. And I remember, so I went for a bunch of interviews, took the train back into the city, had an interview, went home. And I remember the phone rang one day, and it was Don's secretary, Suzette. And she said, Don Carney would like to speak to you. And then she said, you got the job. And I can remember that as if it were yesterday, her whispering really like, you got the job. And I got the job. And so I ended up working in sports TV. So that's how I ended up in TV versus working PR or sports information or anything like that. So to me, it was a dream. It's like sports were my life. I grew up with my dad and my brother being fanatical athletes and sports fans and everything. So that's it, and that's a career.
We talked just before we started recording the podcast about the risk that the Yankees were taking on that. How did that factor into you getting the job, and also maybe the approach you took to it, especially in regards to women working in sports?
I mean, back in those years, in 80 and 81, there were very few women in sports TV, so there were no role models. There was no one I could look at, no one I could see. And so Don Carney, who was the longtime executive producer, director of Yankee baseball, I still don't know why he trusted me that I could do that job. The people before me had been guys. It was the job of font coordinator and graphics coordinator and statistician, and then you had to do all stats manually and stuff. But somehow he believed he could do it. I don't think he was getting any pressure from anybody. He had 2 daughters. Maybe that was it too. And so maybe he somehow saw something in me and did. And when I went to the Yankees, I went to the stadium. We did the home games from the stadium. And everybody was so welcoming. It was amazing. Like Phil Rizzuto. I mean, I remember the first time I was in the press room, and Phil Rizzuto, the Scooter, I mean, Yankee legend, and Bill White, wonderful announcer and wonderful person, and Frank Messer, and even Mel Allen. Mel Allen was doing Sports Channel games, so sometimes he would be there. And they were all so nice to me and helpful and kind, and it was amazing. So, yeah, I was definitely a unicorn at the time. There were a couple of graphics operators that were women. That's kind of where women often tend to be funneled into. There were no tape ops. There were no camera women. So I was it. There were no announcers at the time that were women that I knew of, and certainly not in the New York market. And people were super welcoming. So it was a great place to start.
When you were 11 years old, and this goes back to your love of sports, you participated in an event with the New York Nets, if I'm not mistaken. And that, for me, was kind of the moment where I thought, wow, Amy never really shared this. Of course, we never really talked about it. But it was a huge impact for girls at the time. What was that story?
So I was reading the paper. Newsday, Long Island's own, Long Island's paper, and it said there was a basketball contest, run, dribble, and shoot contest for youth. It said youth, okay? So I showed it to my dad, and he said, hey, that's great. And he was always super supportive. He's a good guy, you know. He was super supportive, and so I got 3 of my little friends, Marissa, Corinne, and Julie, and he took us to St. Mary's High School to go participate in this contest. And we got to the contest, we got to the hallway outside the gym, and there were just all these guys lined up. There were fathers and sons and just tons of hundreds. And this person was saying, no, this contest is for boys, was telling my dad. And so he had the paper and he said, no, look, it says youth. These are youth, okay? It says youth, 9 to 12. These are youth from 9 to 12. And this guy was arguing with my dad and arguing with us. And then the parents, the fathers and the kids were going, let him play, let him play. So, because they figured they would just wipe us out anyway, or maybe they were just good people, who knows? They, we're just these kids, And so they let us play. So we played in the first round. If you made it to the finals was going to be at halftime of an ABA doubleheader at the Garden. Because, the Nets then were in the ABA, okay, which doesn't exist anymore. So, oh my God, the opportunity to play at halftime, in between games of an ABA doubleheader, oh my God, that would have been incredible. And so I ran and I dribbled and I shot. And I came in 3rd in my age group, and we didn't get a phone call going, what's going on? And my parents called, and they called this guy, Jim Garvey, and they said, I'm sorry, this contest is only for boys. You're not allowed to move on. And I was crushed. And then I don't know if my parents called Newsday or something, but this guy came and he wrote an article, and so that's when it became publicized. They sent me a basketball, which didn't hold air, and they sent me like tickets or something like that, and I was just crushed. But now the interesting postscript of that is that so the guy with the Nets was named Jim Garvey, the guy who was the negative person who wouldn't let me play. He ran the PR department or ran their contest or something like that. So fast forward to 1987, I was out in California and working at GGP Sports, a production company, and we were doing the NFL preseason special. So I was assigned as the field producer for Jets and Giants. Well, the Jets at the time practiced at Hofstra. So the sports information director at Hofstra at that time was Jim Garvey, the same guy, right? So I had my article laminated and I brought it. And when I had a little break, I went to his office and I showed his secretary and I said, "Hey, this is me." And she said, "Oh my God, he'll really want to see this. He'll really want to see you. So come back when you can. He's at lunch or something." So I went back and then I talked with them and I said, "I just want to let you know that you didn't ruin my life, that I kept going with sports. I kept working hard and persevering and playing basketball, and now I'm working in sports." And he kind of apologized and said, "Well, that's the way it was at the time. Sorry about that," kind of thing. But that was kind of a neat little postscript on that story. But that, I mean, the fact that my parents always encouraged me to fight for what I believed in and to follow my love and follow my passions and do what I wanted to do. I've always, that continued in sports and in life and everything I do.
How do you feel about maybe the impact that you've had in that regard?
Well, just, I mean, as a kid from this story, there was a women's studies textbook called The Women Yes, and it had stories about girls and women in all different areas, whether it's sports or politics or anything like that. And I was the basketball paragraph. So I was in a textbook, so hopefully people who saw that did get inspired. So Sharon Poole, I remember from New Jersey, was the Little League girl. And so she was the one who broke ground in Little League. I failed at Little League. We used to walk up the hill, every Little League sign up. We'd walk up to the school and we'd go to sign up and they'd say, "Nope, you can't sign up." And we'd walk back down the hill, and we did that every year. And finally, when we were too old, it was my brother's year, one of his friends, Mindy, was one of the first girls to be in our Little League. So, you know, there need to be groundbreakers in every area, and that's the only way anything changes.
Yeah. Where did your love from sports come from?
My dad. My dad was a good basketball player and good baseball player. He actually played at the 92nd Street Y with Lenny Rosenbluth, who is one of University of North Carolina's greatest players of all time. In 1957, Lenny was on the team that beat Will Chamberlain in Kansas in the national championship, and he just died earlier this year. But yeah, he played high-end basketball and baseball, and then he got older and he played softball, and my brother and I would go to games with him all the time and go to his practices, and we'd bring a basketball and shoot around, throw a baseball around. So, and he loved watching games and reading the paper. And we'd sit at my mother was not a sports fan. We would sit at the table and the three of us would be talking about anything: the Mets, the Yankees, the Knicks, the Nets, the Rangers, the Islanders, whatever. And my mother would say, "How did I get into this family? Can't you people talk about anything except sports?" It's like, sorry, that's kind of what we love. Sorry, but
yeah. How would you describe what your dad maybe did, or the surrounding group around you did to help give you that confidence to know that you can do anything?
I mean, both of my parents, to be fair, just because my mother didn't like sports, she wasn't a fan, she really encouraged me. She would say, "Follow your bliss." I remember that. Like, she encouraged me to do what I wanted to do and what I loved, and she always supported me. And so both parents always supported me and supported my brother, and he works in sports too. So it's like we're both doing what we love, and my mother's no longer alive, but my dad's super proud of us. And yeah, they both encouraged us to do what we wanted to do, not try to fit into any mold that our school wanted us to be in or our peer group or anything. So yeah, they both definitely wanted us to be ourselves.
All right, from the Yankees, back to the Yankees. What was your first experience there, and how did that maybe set you up for future work that you're doing?
Well, everybody needs kind of a mentor, especially in their first job, because you don't know what to do. Like, after I got the job, I went back to Memorial Field where I was playing basketball. I was in the group game all the time, and all the guys said, and And I said, I got the job. I got the job. And they said, what are you going to do? I said, I don't really know. I don't know what I'm going to do. I know I'm graphics coordinator and statistician. We'll see. But there was a guy by the name of Ron McGuggins who was the graphics operator, and he was working alongside me, and he had probably been an operator, I don't know, for 4 or 5 years. I'm not really sure. But he was a really great operator, and he basically showed me what I needed to do to succeed. John Moore, who had been in my position, was the AD. He showed me too, and he kind of showed me the paperwork and things like that. But Ron, working alongside me, was saying, no, you have to do this, and helping me organize and treating me with respect. And he knew I knew sports, and I just had to figure out how to be a good graphics coordinator. And so I really owe a lot to John, but to Ron, who really helped me succeed. Because if you don't have anyone kind of helping you along, and if they're just letting you fail, no one's born knowing how to be a graphics coordinator. Who knows, Yeah. So he was great, and yeah.
And that's led to you working with most of the major networks, not only in the United States, but throughout the world. You've worked multiple Olympics, World Championships. I can't even list how many you've done, but give a quick recap, if you can recall, some of the more significant events that you've worked.
I mean, I've worked 17 Olympics. So my first Olympics was actually Sarajevo in 1984, February 1984. Then I worked LA, where I was fortunate enough to be assigned to basketball, which kind of blew my mind, because that was with ABC. I was with ABC Sports at that time. I was staff. After 2 years with the Yankees, I went to ABC. So I worked my first 2 Olympics, and they assigned me to basketball. I thought, oh my God, this is great. I figured they would assign some guy to basketball, and I was shocked they assigned me. But I was thrilled, because that was my first love. Since then, I've worked other Olympics for CBS and NBC and CBC. My most recent Olympics was 2021, Tokyo, where I worked cycling with CBC. I've worked World Cycling Championships, World Athletics Championships. I've worked Asian Games, Asian Winter Games in Kazakhstan. I worked Race Across America, which was really one of kind of the life-changing events for me, because I don't know if you know about Race Across America. It's basically a time trial across country on your bike. So, and there was no team ram at this time. I think it was maybe 13 competitors that started from Southern California to Atlantic City, I think was the finish, in 1983. And it was so low tech. We sat the camera crew, and it was a film crew. This was with ABC's Wide World of Sports. We sat in the back of a flatbed truck on these little, like, folding beach chairs, seriously, in the back of the truck, and spoke to the cyclists, the racers, with the boom mic and everything. And my job was to figure out logistically who was where. There were no cell phones. There was no GPS. So I had to figure out who was where and who we were going to shoot next, going backwards or forwards, things like that. And we literally saw the United States from west to east, full on 180 degrees at like 20 miles an hour. It was incredible. I mean, the places we went was incredible. And it really made me love cycling. Like, that made me want to get on a bike and start riding more than I already had. So that was an amazing work experience, and it changed my life. And I'm still in touch with some of those people I became friends with on the race. So that's one event. I mean, I've worked hundreds of college basketball, volleyball, football, MLB. I worked Monday Night Baseball, Monday Night Football. I was the first woman to survive a Monday Night Football season. Field produced and produced hundreds of features for ESPN2 on extreme sports. You name it, I even worked a little golf, which I can't stand, but I was assigned to that, so I ignore that. So yeah, I've worked a lot in English and Spanish. Worked with you ESPN
Yes.
Deportes and ESPN International on a couple of jobs, and worked the Tour de France for ESPN International in 2001. So with baseball in Mexico.
Yeah, and speaking of us working together, I think one of the first events that we worked together was actually in the Dominican Republic, covering the Salón de la Fama, which is the Hall of Fame for Latino baseball players there. And great production, but we had to rush it to get out, and I think we had a rain delay that made it even more challenging. Do you remember that story?
Yeah, I kind of remember that there was some connection issue that we weren't able to feed from the truck, even though hopefully that was the plan, and we had to leave our beautiful location, on a resort location at like 2 a.m. to get to Santo Domingo by 5 to feed by 6 or something like that, and just scramble and try to feed everything. We fed everything and then went to the airport. That's part of the this is not all glamour department. Yeah.
Well, and that was as challenging as it was. That was a fun event, and I really learned how important each role is to a production, because doing things differently in Latin America, not necessarily technical, but the setup and everything, and really it showed me, at least where I had a ton of respect for you, is I didn't have to worry about anything behind me as a producer. You were taking care of everything, and I was amazed. I even thought, there's no way I could have done what you did. You've worked a lot of different roles in television. How would you describe maybe what it is between a stage manager and an AD and a field producer, kind of just the different roles that you've taken on, what the differences are?
Well, as a stage manager with the announcers on the court, say there's a basketball game behind me. I work a lot of Cal games or something. I have promo cards for them. I also am listening to program, listening to what they're talking about, and every once in a while, if I can find a tidbit, I can look in the game notes and I can write, oh, so-and-so's approaching a game high, or this is, season high, career high, rebounds for so-and-so's next block will be his third, and that's a career high, things of that sort, kind of keeping them. The more I know about the sport, which luckily in basketball I do, I can really add to the telecast and let the producer, who's either in the truck or in the control room, give them some thoughts about what might work at this point, and also write little chicken scratch notes to the announcers. I'm also coordinating the on-camera stand-up. You're making sure the talent, the announcers know when to look at the camera and when to look at the monitor, so they're not looking down at a piece of paper when the camera's on them, and they're not looking at the camera when they should actually be reading graphics on the monitor. So you're kind of the eyes and ears out there, and just helping. You can do as little as you want, or you can do as much as you want. Now, as an AD, it's totally different. AD, you're in the control room, and so I worked a football package for Pac-12 Network with the producer, Dave Feldman, and the director, Tom Satursky, and we had a consistent crew, and so everyone kind of knew what we were doing, and we each knew that we could count on the other one to take care of our own little space. As Dave said to us, he really appreciated that we took ownership of our position and we got everything done. So I'm working with sponsor copy, you see all the papers there. It's like all the sponsors we need to get in, and you need to work with master control, work with the first and 10 feather, which is a way that the graphic, that a little sponsor pops out from the graphic that says jockey or something like that. So make sure you get all the sponsor stuff in. You're counting in and out of commercial breaks. You want to be going to a commercial break at the right time, not too soon, so it upcuts either a bump or upcuts the announcer, but not too late. And then you want to come up at the right time. So it's a lot of kind of traffic-y sort of things. And field producer is like what I did at the Olympics, and you're out in the field or on the court or in the mix zone, either doing interviews yourself or coordinating and helping wrangling interviews for a reporter, for an announcer. So That's it.
What do you find is the most rewarding?
I like mixing it up, to be honest. I wouldn't. What I like about what I do is that since I have so many areas that I can fill, I don't have to do the same thing all the time because it gets old. Like an AD pays more than a stage manager, but going into a control room every day would get boring after a while, get monotonous. So being able to come to a game and be on the floor and see what's going on and coordinate with different people and see different people and talk to the fans behind you, things of that sort. I mean, it's nice to mix it up. It also means that I have a little bit more of a choice of what events I can work. If there's an event that I really want to work, I could try to find my way in because I have different skills.
You are also multilingual. English, of course. Spanish, I believe, is your second. But you speak Russian?
I speak Russian. I speak Italian. Yeah. Yep. So Spanish has been really the most useful in opening up doors because it obviously allowed me to work with ESPN Deportes and ESPN International. And for a while, they were sending me to go produce Serie del Caribe and things like that. But then also in 2003, I read something, I don't even know where I read it, but that the Pan Am Games were going to be in the Dominican Republic, and CBC, Canadian Broadcasting Corporation, was doing the host feed. So the host feed is when someone is doing basically not a home feed, a feed that all the countries will take. So it's like an unbiased feed. You're not saying, oh, okay, I'm just focusing on Canada or focusing on the Dominican Republic. You're doing an unbiased feed. And they were using so I emailed the guy and said, hey, I'd like to remember me. I met you at the Pan Am Games in Winnipeg in 1999. I hear you guys are doing the Pan Am Games in the Dominican Republic. I speak Spanish and would love to work with you guys. But it ended up there was one spot where they needed a freelancer who could be a non-Canadian because it was such a niche spot. Was they were producing baseball and they were using an all Dominican tape room and a Dominican director, bringing one tape guy, EBS guy from the U.S., from Canada, graphics from Canada, and a producer from Canada. And so they needed someone who could speak English and Canadian and Spanish to work with all of those groups. So I got the job there. And then from that really jumped me off on working with CBC on Olympics. Because I'd worked with NBC in the past, and they had always given cycling to their staff people, and I was really frustrated. It's like, I want to do cycling, I know cycling, and CBC had no such issues. That was 2003, I worked the World Championships of Cycling were in Hamilton, Ontario, that October, so I worked that. And then from then, I worked Athens Olympics, and they assigned me to cycling because I knew cycling. So then I worked with them through 2020 on Olympics. So, and then Russian, I speak Russian, which is kind of rare. And the reason I learned Russian is I used to work this women's bike race called HP Women's Challenge. It used to be called Orida starting in 1984. It was all around Idaho. It was a stage race, women's stage race all around Idaho. And at the time, in the late 90s, early 2000s, Lithuania was the women's cycling power. Lithuania has the population of Montreal, but they had 3 world champions within like 5 or 6 years or something. So those women did not speak English, and it was really frustrating to me. And they didn't speak Italian because they hadn't moved to Italy, which a lot of the Russians had moved to Italy, so they spoke Italian. So I said to the director of the Lithuanian team in Italian, I said, next year when I come to this race, I'm going to be able to speak to the twins. It was Rasa and Jolanta Polakeviciute. I said, tell them that next year I'm going to be able to speak to them. So I took classes and I got podcasts and everything like that, and I took classes at City College, night school, and I learned Russian well enough to communicate. And then I was sent to Moscow for the Kremlin Cup by ESPN to be their only on-site coordinator because I could actually communicate. And then I can't remember if it was 2000, I think it was 2006, a guy that I knew from CBC was coordinating a world feed of hockey at the Asian Winter Games in Kazakhstan. So they took me there to be the on-the-floor coordinator, making sure everything was on time and the event was working well, and TV knew what the event was doing and the event knew what TV was doing. And I was able to take people to have dinner and exchange their money, and that was amazing. I mean, Kazakhstan was an incredible place. That was super, super interesting. Culturally, it was freezing. It was absolutely freezing, but it was really a lot of fun. So yeah. My language have opened lots of doors.
Note for anyone who's young, getting in the business, language skills are important and can get you a lot of places that you might not otherwise get to. So Amy, other than cycling, because that's your passion, and we'll talk about that in a minute, what are some other sports that really kind of resonate with you, and how do you approach coverage of those?
I mean, right now, saying approaching coverage, I don't really approach coverage of anything because I don't drive the bus. I'm always kind of a side person, more of an assistant. So a producer would say that they approach coverage a certain way. But to be honest, I just listen to what the producer and director want and help them with their vision. And I mean, and basketball is really basketball and baseball to a lesser extent. I know baseball really well too, although I didn't play it. But so those are the two sports where I feel like I can assist the most. And by looking at notes and listening to announcers and just knowing the history that I have in my brain from 50 years of paying attention to these sports, I can come up with good tidbits and help the announcers and help the production crew.
How have you seen television sports coverage change over the years that you've been involved?
Well, there's a lot more remote, and I think it started before the pandemic, but the pandemic really sped it up in that now people weren't traveling, so people didn't want to travel, so more and more people were doing what ESPN calls Remy's and what Pac-12 calls multicams, where they're in a control room and there's fewer people traveling. And so a lot of times when the announcers, for a couple of years, the announcers weren't traveling, so that cut the stage manager job completely. And then the announcers started traveling a little bit, but then by that time they had even when the announcers were traveling, they had a monitor that had their copy, their promo copy and things like that. So sometimes they don't even hire a stage manager anymore. So the changes have been for the good for some positions and for the bad for other positions. For Pac-12 Network in their studio, their first 5 or 6 years of existence, I AD'd every studio show that they had if I wanted it, if I didn't have a conflict or something. And there were the halftime shows and pre-games and post-games. Now all those shows, they have automation, so they have a robot voice that counts backwards, but isn't able to make on-the-fly decisions. But I don't make that much money, but it saves them in the long run. It saves them a position. It saves them money. So, technology is great for some, but it's made things a little rough in some ways.
I pulled some photos from your Facebook page, so I just want to kind of go through some of them. Maybe just get a quick thought of each one of the photos based on your memory, and just kind of have fun with this.
So this is 2020 because we're wearing masks in Tokyo. So that's Sirpa Hovi from Finland. And one of the things about working Olympics is you see the same people every 2 or 4 years, and it's really amazing. I mean, I first worked with Sirpa in Torino when she was the venue manager at cross country and biathlon, and I was the field producer for CBC at cross country and biathlon. So we just always connected, and we just got along really well. And every couple of years I see her, and so I was on cycling in Tokyo, but we had like 4 dark days between disciplines, like between mountain biking and road biking and the track. And so they sent us up to sailing, and she was the venue manager at sailing. And that was unfortunately the closest we could get because of pandemic and stuff. That was really nice to see her. This is stage managing hockey, and as you can see, I'm pointing toward the monitor, so the reporter or announcer can say, "Hey, look at this. This is what you should be talking about. You shouldn't be looking in the camera." This was our crew when the All-Star Hockey NHL All-Star game was in San Jose a few years ago. So that was just our crew at the desk. So that was really fun. That's me in the mix zone of Pyeongchang.
Explain what a mix zone is.
A mix zone is after any event at Olympics or Pan Am Games or any international event. The mix zone coordinator people, different staff, will run the athletes through the mix zone, and they will give you a minute to speak to them, or maybe less. And if it's your home country, maybe they'll give you a little more. It's like, okay, we'll give you 2 minutes for the Canadian, and then you get a minute for the Brit, and a minute for the Australian, and a minute for the Lithuanian, whatever. So they're basically keeping them going through like a sausage factory. Picture, 50 rights holders, all with their crews alongside that fence, and just trying to say, hey, get someone's attention or get the mix zone coordinator's attention. And that's also the mix zone. So that's Caroline Calvé, who is our reporter for CBC at cycling in Rio, and Michel, who is a fantastic cameraman from Ottawa, and he was so great at working cycling. He was totally on top of things, and then we worked together again in Tokyo, and I was grateful. He was awesome. This is Dick Barnett. So for NBA, every once in a while they asked me to do interviews, random interviews. And so this was when John McClendon was being inducted into the Hall of Fame. And so Dick Barnett had played for McClendon in college, and Dick Barnett I knew as number 12 for the Knicks when I was growing up. And with these older guys, you don't know if they're going to be nice or crusty or what, especially if you're a woman. It's like, you never know. But I have the opportunity to talk to Dick Barnett and to say, hey, I remember watching you play. I'd go to the Garden, watch you and Frazier and Reed and stuff like that. He couldn't have been nicer. He was awesome. So this was really one of my favorite interviews we've ever done. It was actually in a hotel room in Berkeley. So, yeah, he was terrific. It was a great interview, and he was a great guy, Dr. Dick Barnett. And that's Emily Batty. This is at the Pan Am Games in Toronto in 2015, which, as you can see from the way I'm dressed, it was brutally hot. Living in the Bay Area now, I'm not used to the humidity. It was 90-something or whatever it was in centigrade. But yeah, so we're doing all the interviews for cycling. I covered cycling, all the cycling events and triathlon there, and that was a lot of fun, other than the heat. That's the Hockey Night in Canada, the famous towel. Everybody loves this when you're with Hockey Night in Canada. When there's an intermission interview, one of the floor managers, called floor manager in Canada versus stage manager, the floor manager has to put the beautiful CBC towel so you see the signage in the camera shot. So I prided myself at being able to do that well, and then I got a towel myself. And that's me that looks like the NBA Finals there, which luckily the Warriors weren't a lot, so we got used to working the NBA Finals every year. That was in Vancouver, working the Vancouver Olympics for APTN, Aboriginal People's Television Network, where I coordinated guests on their studio, for their studio show. Coordinated guests coming in and features all with Aboriginal themes. So that was that was a terrific job. This is Gord Fraser. So it's at Tour of Alberta, lasted for a few years. That was a fun race. And then as many of these Tour ofs, as you know, they disappear.
A lot of what you do too is not just wrangling interviews and doing the technical stuff. It's also working alongside a lot of very well-known personalities. What is that like, and what kind of relationships are you able to develop being alongside of them for a good portion of the season?
I mean, like anybody, you either maybe get along with someone or maybe you don't, but hopefully you do. And if you get along with someone and work with them a lot, him or her, hopefully they trust you. And I feel like, especially with basketball, that a lot of these announcers trust me, and if I tell them something, they'll believe me, whether they'll know that I'm not going to slip a piece of paper at an inopportune time or something that doesn't make any sense or something. And I remember working with some of these people for decades, and they're like Sirpa from Finland. They become friends. They become people that you see and you trust them and you like them, and it's lovely seeing these people that are from all over the country or all over the world, every so often. But I mean, working with someone like Bill Walton is a lot of fun, because he always, Bill Walton's a big deadhead, right? So I was working a Cal game actually right here, and I found out that the team from Annalee High School in Sebastopol was here, behind us. Why is that significant? That's significant because that's where Jerry Garcia went to high school. So I told Bill that, and he was like, "Are you sure? Are you positive that's them and everything?" I said, "Yep." And it was just the most amazing, crazy coincidence. But of course, he took it and ran with it as a dead lover. And he's also a cyclist. He has the Check for Bikes bumper sticker that my boyfriend and I created and came up with as safety initiatives for drivers to watch for bicyclists when they're driving. And so he's a cyclist, he's a hippie, he's a basketball star, and he's a good guy. So anytime I can work with Bill, I'm so happy. He's a great guy. So Chris Smolens, fellow New Yorker. So he and his wife came when Oregon was playing Cal, the women, when Sabrina Ionescu was here. And a lot of great basketball players appreciate the game of Sabrina Ionescu and appreciate the game of high quality women's basketball. So I saw him after the game, and it shows a lot about it tells you a lot about women's basketball when someone like Chris Smolens is coming there. Now that's Larry Brown. So Larry Brown is 81 years old, which is 10 years younger than my dad, who's 91 years old, and 92 and 82. You lose track, and once you get up there, anyway, I practically lose track. So my dad was Larry and his brother Herb's camp counselor at camp back when Larry was probably 6 or 7 or something, and his brother Herb, who's also a former coach, was probably 10 or 11 or something. So I worked this SMU game and saw Larry, and he's always super gracious whenever I see him. He goes, "How's your family?" He still's got the New York accent, which is great, but he's a good fellow, so it's nice seeing him every so often. Thurl Bailey, yeah, so Thurl Bailey went to NC State, and since I'm a Blue Devil, I appreciate former other ACC players. He's the color commentator for the Jazz, Utah Jazz. Super, super nice guy.
And knowing your love of cycling, this next photo is probably going to have some kind of reaction here.
Yeah, I mean, that's Phil Liggett on the left and the late, great Paul Sherwin on the right. I mean, they were teammates on so many bike races over the years and over the decades, and as great as they were on the air together, they're as good people. And so, Paul died in his, I guess, early 60s. It was so sad, so sad. So that, yeah, this is a tough one to look at. Yeah, that's from the Tour of California. Yeah, they're jokes. They're just sweet people. I mean, they know they know cycling like nobody does. I mean, Phil has been working on tours for forever, and they're just good people, and I just cherish the time I was able to spend with them. I miss Paul, And there's Phil at where's that? In Rio. Yeah, he always does cycling commentary for Australia Channel 7. So again, the kind of every Olympics is a reunion kind of deal there. Yeah. But that's the best seat in the house to have, is in those little mix zone areas, track cycling. Everything just happens around you. People at home, if you've never seen track cycling, go to a velodrome. It's awesome. Oh, and there's Vince Carter, Carolina. So another ACC person. So we got Carolina, Duke, and NC State beforehand. So Vince Carter was one of our guest commentators for the world feed on at one of the NBA finals. And there's my friend Tanya that I worked with. She works for NBA, and so every year, because we were here every year for the finals, she was like my little work daughter, and we'd hang out and watch the game after we worked pregame. So nice person, super passionate about basketball too. And this is in Pyeongchang, where oddly we have the Sharks territory placard, because Danny on the right was the PA announcer, and the other guy whose name I forget, I'm sorry, also worked in game ops, and they were the game ops for Pyeongchang, which kind of blew my mind, hearing that familiar voice, after every goal was scored there. And that's the gang in Pyeongchang, and that's probably saying that it's day 5. We still look okay. So Amy Trask was one of the commentators for on the studio for the Super Bowl, CBS's Super Bowl coverage when it won the Super Bowl. So Amy Trask is the former CEO of the Raiders. So talk about women who have broken the major glass ceiling. Amy Trask is it. So I was super proud to be able to meet her and work with her, because boy, she was amazing. And that's John Shriffen, who was one of our reporters and hosts at the Super Bowl there too. It was fun. This was Torrey, Utah, which finally gave up the ghost during the pandemic. So Todd Gogulski on the left, me, Jen Hale was our reporter, and Steve on the right he was the local Utah guy, but he got into cycling and got to know it and got to love it, and we were a good team, and I miss that race a lot.
Thank you for sharing a lot of that with me today. I just kind of want to show one more rip of photos, and this kind of gives an idea of the types or how close people like you are to some of these events. You're right on the sidelines a lot of times.
I was probably Red Hat. Yeah, Red Hat for Raiders back before they flew the coop from Oakland the second time. Yeah, that was a good gig.
And a Red Hat controls the field.
Correct, controls the field. Make sure that the teams do not play before TV is ready for them to play. And that's what I just did at volleyball today, as I was Red Hat for women's volleyball. And that's announcing, that's the back of Bill Walton's head, I believe, and that's at a Cal game. That's in the control room. This was just the other day. This must have been the big game the other day. And that's NBA Media Day with the Kings, Sacramento Kings, where you've got, see all those papers on the chair and those papers all over the place. There's like a million questions and taglines and greetings in multiple languages and hello Indonesia, things like that. There's a lot going on there. That's in Pyeongchang at hockey, and I think those are the Swedish announcers who are next to us. So all the announce positions were the studio positions were kind of rung around the arena. So those were our neighbors from Sweden. The boxing, and in boxing, the most important thing is try not to get blood splattered on your nice white paper, or yourself. That's interviewing Steph at a gym in Walnut Creek where he was giving some like kids camps and stuff like that. I just want to say Steph is everything that you hear about Steph, how nice he is and what a good person he is. It's even more so. Like, he and his wife are so giving, and even when the team left Oakland, they felt bad about it in a lot of ways, and they would fund courts in Oakland during the pandemic. They fed kids. They provided breakfast and lunch to kids in Oakland. They've also funded computer labs, computer rooms in schools in Oakland and stuff like that. He's like everything. You say he can't be, it's too good to be true, but it is. He's really a good guy. So, and a great player. Oh, there's Draymond Green. So this is also NBA Media Day, where, yeah, who knows what that cue card is from anywhere. Ni hao, China. I'm Draymond Green. You know, it's everything. You're just whipping through these things, and that's Bill Walton's iPad, and he, of course, supports the Check for Bikes cause.
So, stage manager for different kinds of events. I know you have a story about working with the Angels and being a stage manager on the field.
Yeah. So when you're a stage manager, one thing that you cannot do is let anyone run in front of the camera, run in front of the announcers, between the announcers and the camera. That's like the most awful thing that you can do. You'll get yelled at and you won't be hired again, okay? So with the Angels, they would do their their pregame show on the field, and I would be between the camera and the dugout, and all these Angels would want to run onto the field past me and through the camera, but I wouldn't let them, and I'd box them out and everything. I wouldn't let them. But the deal was Mike Trout, because Mike Trout was Mike Trout, and this was before Shohei was even on the team. So Mike Trout was Mike Trout. He was allowed to run through it. It was kind of this cute little game. And then everyone else I would box out, and then Mike would kind of give me the look, and I'd say, okay. And he would run through, and he'd run right in front of the camera. He'd go, okay, that's Mike. And he was, he's a cool guy, and he's Mike Trout, so we let him run across the camera. So Mike Trout's the exception.
And those are just the fun anecdotes on the relationship sometimes between television and sports and athletes. You can do stuff like that. It's not all rigid as most people think. Of course, the bigger events probably are more restrictive, but those are fun stories.
Right. And once you see people more and get to know them more, then you kind of get a relationship. I mean, like Steph, if ever I see him, he always makes sure he says hello. And like at the at NBA media days, he always sits down and he goes, "How many years you've been doing this? You've been doing this a long time, haven't you?" He always says, like, "Yep, since you were a sophomore at Davidson." Yep, exactly. So yeah, so it's nice when they remember you and you're not just a faceless blurb. They actually know you as a human being.
Okay, Amy, I know this business is crazy. We kind of talked about us working in the Dominican with the rain delay and then getting everything out the door. What other types of stories do you have? You have to have something.
Okay, so the craziest story I have, we're working the Kent Tour of China, meaning Kent Cigarettes sponsored the Tour of China. And as an aside, there were actually women who had cigarettes, little things of cigarettes, and were at the time trial and stuff, and were handing them out to people and everything. That's bizarre as it is, okay? They sponsored, It was British American Tobacco or something, I think it was called, Kent Cigarettes. But so it was a small group that was invited there to work and to race, and it was totally seat of the pants cheap. Like normally at a race, you see that they have really nice sponsor vehicles, and so they're in good order. Well, our camera vehicles were like these crummy, old, run-down cars with balding tires and stuff like that. And we had a driver, and we had the camera guy, and we had me, and we were supposed to do go-bys. Like we would pass the peloton and then find some really cool spot, like with water buffalo or something like that, and then wait, and they'd pass by and we'd get this incredible shot. I mean, it was in really rural areas. It was super. So one stage, we were driving, and all of a sudden, boom, the tire blew out. And so the tire blew out, and so what are we going to do? Like, we can't wait for this tire. There's no spare anything. What are we going to do? And I said to the driver, "You just stay." And I flagged down this driver, I just went like this, and there was this guy who was going somewhere on the direction of the race, and he stopped, and because I speak Mandarin, I was able to explain that, hey, we're in a bike race, and this is the camera guy, and we need someone to drive past the peloton and stop when I tell you to stop so we can get a shot. You got time? And he said, sure. And so, sure enough, we were in this car with this stranger who thought he was going to work or something, and I'd tell him, we'd cue the commissar, this big tall guy, the commissar. We'd cue him that we're behind him and we want to go by because he didn't recognize our car anymore. And then he would say go by, and I'd tell the guy pass on the left, and you have to pass really, really fast, pass with space and everything. And then we'd find a spot and I'd say, okay, stop, and we'd get our go by and do it again. And this guy, I have this great story to tell, and hopefully he has a good story to tell too. This time that he was kind of hijacked by this bike race crew, but that wasn't the plan for either of us, but it was kind of a cool thing, and made chicken salad out of chicken liver. And then I guess eventually the car, I don't know what happened to the car. Eventually it got fixed, and the next day we were fine. But yeah, so that whole trip was kind of a seat of your pants trip, and it was a lot of fun and a lot of adrenaline and adventure. That was kind of the craziest thing. That was definitely fun.
Lots of fun to be had in the TV industry.
Yeah, there's someone sending you to China. That's a pretty cool thing. Wouldn't have done that with the Durham Bulls. So yeah.
Now, we talked about your family being in sports. Your mom wasn't so much, but she pushed you into it. But your brother is still in the sports world, you mentioned. What is he doing these days?
So my brother is a basketball official. He lives in New York, so he officiates a lot of small college and high-end high school basketball all over the metropolitan area, which is really great. So a lot of times I'll work games, and then I'll text him and say, hey, did you know this guy from Lutheran or whatever, from one of these schools? And he'll go, oh, yeah, and he'll give me tidbits. And sometimes I'll literally hand the phone. There's a guy from Stanford that he officiated, and he knew a lot about him. And so he texted me some stuff, and I literally handed the phone to Dan Belwamini, who's one of our color commentators, former coach of USF, and he loved the story. So he told the story straight from my brother's phone to him about this guy, Michael O'Connell, right? So my brother's is a basketball official, but also he's a former soccer coach. He coached youth soccer and college soccer for decades. And this past year, he got an opportunity to be color commentator on Fordham men's and women's soccer. And we talked for a long time. I talked from my end of what announcers need to do about what he needs to do. And one of his good friends is Shep Messing, who's a former Olympic soccer player and teammate of Pele, who does color. So he talked to Shep a lot, and Shep gave him a lot of input and hints and stuff. And Michael worked really hard. I didn't tell anyone at first because I didn't know. It's hard being on the air, right? I mean, it's hard enough doing this, let alone being on the air, right? And he was good. And after every game, I'd have these little tidbits and stuff, little notes and things, and he would improve things, and he would watch the games back. And he was really, really good. And it was all college kids except him. Even the play-by-play person was a college kid, and the whole crew doing the games were college kids at Fordham and everything. But he did a really good job, so I was really proud of him. I mean, he's younger than me, but he's getting up there, and to take a risk of doing something new like that was really impressive. So I was super proud of him, and he was terrific, so that was neat. And he also used to be he was a minor league umpire for a while too, and then he realized that there was no moving forward, that you get stuck in the minor leagues, and so he was a minor league umpire. So he's been pro in 3 sports in one way or another. So we're 2 peas in my father's pod.
Well, your parents did a great job raising the both of you.
Thank you. Thanks a lot. Appreciate it, Don.
And being in the Bay Area, cycling, as I've seen from your Facebook posts, is a big deal for you. Explain what that program that you started. is?
Well, check for bikes is if you've ever ridden your bike and say you've been in a bike lane, and then a driver comes across and then turns right across you because he or she did not look, or they find that parking space and go, they're just kind of inhaled into that parking space, or they park in a parallel parking space and they fling their door open. So my boyfriend came up with an idea of a little window cling that has this check for bikes image, and it's a cling material, the same material as an oil change reminder. So he brought it to our advocacy group, which is called Albany Strollers and Rollers. He brought it to us and asked us to produce them. So we did, and we've produced them, and since then we produced them in Spanish, and we've also produced them in with the image of a kid, because Davis asked us to produce them with an image of a child cyclist with the UC Davis with their Safe Routes to School down at the bottom. So we did that, and I said, oh, let's do kid ones for everybody. So we've basically we customized them with anyone's website or information down at the bottom, and we've probably got 30,000 of these, and also the bumper stickers that you saw on Bill's equipment. Yeah, we've got tens of thousands of those out there, because every person that's paying attention to who's out there before they open their door or turn right or turn left or pull into a parking space or anything like that is another safe cyclist. So
how does that affect you in your daily life in terms of environmental concerns?
I mean, I grew up riding everywhere because that was the way to get places, but now it's kind of with climate change, it became more important that I focus on that. And there's another reason other than just loving it and feel like I'm getting exercise, is I'm really trying to minimize the impact I have on the earth. And I have a car, a Honda Fit, and it sits at my boyfriend's house, and if I need it every once in a while, I'll get it, but otherwise I will ride my bike to work. I will take BART, which is the train here, to work. I'll take AC Transit, the bus, to work. I'll take BART with my bike to work. I rode here today. Nothing better than a Cal game where I can commute by bike. But, I mean, everyone's got to do their part, and I really feel like I'm doing my part. And in addition to advocating locally for bike lanes and bike racks and helping fund bike racks and all that kind of stuff, I'm really trying to definitely walk the walk, roll the roll of minimizing my impact, reduce, reuse, recycle, and not contribute to greenhouse gas emissions. It's like, we got to do it. So I'm doing it.
I only have a couple more questions for you. Hopefully they'll not be too much for you, but what's the most treasured credential you have, would you say?
Oh, God, probably. That's a good question. I don't really know. I've kind of got a bunch of them hanging on doorknobs places, so they're mostly Olympics. And I mean, I don't know that I have really one most treasured credential, but the ones that I have are Olympics and then the World Cycling Championships in Hamilton, because that kind of led to a lot of Olympics. So I'd say those are the bunch of most treasured credentials. But I do have lots of pins. I have like 1,000 pins on a board that I've been collecting since Sarajevo. That's a pretty good collection.
And then final question, what is your favorite sports movie?
Oh, well, I've got two. I got to have a tie, because Breaking Away I would see 1,000 times, and if you out there haven't seen Breaking Away, you have to see it. It's amazing because it's more than just a sports movie. It's a people movie. It's relationships. It's just one of the most wonderful movies ever. And then my favorite kind of stick and ball sports movie, because it's so sad and it's incredible, is Brian's Song. I mean, that was a TV movie back when I was a kid, and I would watch it every year or every 6 months whenever it came on TV, and I just loved it. And I love James Caan.
Yeah, and Breaking Away.
Yeah,
Good
Breaking
stories
Away.
all the way around. Thank you, Amy, for your time today. I truly appreciate you sharing your journey in this business, and I look forward to seeing what you're doing going forward.
Thank you. Thanks for having me, Don, and see you, hopefully work with you again one day, 1 month, 1 year.
Amy Smolens, broadcast TV pioneer, cycling enthusiast and activist, and one of the most versatile production people in this business. She is trusted to make sure all the producers get exactly what they need to make a great broadcast. So the next time you watch a sporting event on TV, you'll get a sense of what she does. Thanks to Amy for her time, and I look forward to seeing what events she works on in the future. If you like this episode, be sure to subscribe to @SportsMaking on YouTube or your preferred podcast listening platform. More great episodes are on their way, and if there is someone that works in sports that you'd like to hear from, drop a comment on YouTube or on the Facebook page. Also, like, share, and review. Thank you for listening to Sports in the Making. I'm your host, Don Cardona.